The time is 5:30 p.m. We will now call this special public meeting of the Board of Trustees of Humble Independent School District to order. Thank you for joining us tonight. Reminder that the meetings of the board are open to the public, but are not a meeting of the public. There are students and other guests present. To maintain decorum and respectful behavior will be expected. Disruptive behavior and/or comments will not be allowed. And with that, our first item. The next item is public comment. The board encourages comments from citizens of the district or from district employees. Anyone wishing to speak, either as an individual or as a representative of a group, may do so following the procedure outlined in the agenda. The board asks that comments pertain to public education issues and be no longer than 1 minute. Remember that the board may not discuss or act upon any issues that are not posted on our agenda for tonight's meeting. If an issue mentioned is listed on tonight's agenda, the board will defer discussion until the appropriate time during the meeting. In addition, the board has adopted complaint policies that are designed to secure at the lowest administrative level a prompt and equitable resolution of complaints and concerns. Complaints brought by students or their parents, by employees, and by citizens may be heard in accordance with board policies. Each of these processes provides that if a resolution cannot be achieved administratively, the person may appeal the administrative decision to the board as a properly posted agenda item. Copies of our district policies on public participation in meetings and filing complaints are available on the Humble ISD website. We will move to public comment, and I will call each person who has signed up to the podium. First, we have Stacy Smith.
Hello. In general, the board follows a rotation for board president. This helps ensure order and that everyone has an opportunity to lead the board. Board policy does not allow any board member to serve in that same position for 2 consecutive terms. This would prevent one person from controlling the board unduly. Why was this policy instituted? Who does it serve to waive or change the policy? What does a board member have to gain by being board president? If you didn't want to follow the rotation and choose Robert Scarfo, you had 5 other ethical choices. I can't understand choosing to violate board policy and then defending it rather than correcting it. I can't understand the motivation behind waiving policy rather than just removing Ms. Lemon-Dixon and replacing her with, again, any of the 5 other choices. Is it to avoid admitting a mistake? Is it for personal gain? It certainly isn't to follow board policy. She was very eager last week to move beyond this issue and used board policy of not speaking on something not on the agenda to defend herself, ignoring the violation. So do you support board policy or just the ones that benefit you? Why would a board member enter into a consecutive term knowing that she is in violation? Why would other board members support this? I want to ask what you would say to a student in the district about this, how you would explain that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Julie Ledewig. Nope. Okay, we will move on to Tracy Shannon.
The public would like to know why y'all are doing this, and why did you try to work around the rules to avoid a rotation in the board presidency? How this benefits students, teachers, employees, and parents in this district who are expected to follow all policies. This, like other recent actions, such as ordering a heavy police presence when we showed up last week and preventing us from talking to press or even doing a Facebook Live on this property, seems very heavy-handed, which really indicates that a change in leadership is needed on this board. Not following the rules set forth, working around them with no communication to the public as to why this is necessary or helpful does not inspire confidence in this board.
Thank you. Next, we have Justin Lurie.
At the previous board meeting, the entire concept of the board following your own rules. It was dismissed. It was dismissed as a nuisance. I really can't figure out, why are we here? Why are we having this vote? Who does this benefit? Does it benefit the kids? No. Does this benefit your staff? No. Does this benefit any parents? No. Does it benefit the taxpayers? Again, no. I see two things. I see one, an elimination of the de facto term limits. And that makes me shake my head so hard, it's hard to even explain. And second, I see a personal agenda. What happens when you sit in these fancy chairs? Do you forget who you are? You immediately run for the next office? Is that what we're looking for? There seems to be a trend here. Have you all forgotten why? Why did you run for this office? Why did you earn my vote? Why did you earn a lot of my friends' votes? Remember who you are at your core, because surely, positively, you do not run for this office for this vote tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Megan Bast. Not here. We'll move on. Larissa Powell.
Good evening. The community is watching you. We're questioning your motives behind your blatant disregard for board policy. It's apparent that you feel that the rules need not to apply to you. You're representing the voters. You're representing your own agenda. By voting yes to change the board policy tonight, you will cause the voters in the community to question your integrity of every single decision you make. We all know you've made up your mind already, because in the latest decision of the Humble ISD newspaper, it's welcoming you, Ms. Dixon, as the school board president. Is the meeting tonight a ploy to cover up your gross disregard for board policy? It's time to get your act together, because you're an embarrassment to the district and showing our children that if the staff or you don't like your own policies or rules, you just change your agenda to fit it. Everything this board does and continues to do will be held in question by the community now. Ms. Dixon, you were just appointed by Greg Abbott as the Commissioner for Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. The mission of TCO is to establish and enforce standards to ensure that people
Thank you
of
very
Texas...
much.
Well, can we just change the rules to fit my agenda?
Thank you. Mr. Ted LeBlanc.
Good afternoon. All three of my children graduated from Humble High School. In addition, I am a precinct chair and HCRP chair for Senate District 4. For far too long, the taxpayers and residents have watched the shenanigans of this board. That is the most appropriate word I can use to describe the childish, irresponsible, and petty squabbling amongst y'all. This is the second time you've attempted to circumvent the policies and procedures regarding the rotation of officers. It appears that Mr. Robert Sinton has been the ringleader in both times. The board should be censored for their lack of transparency and integrity regarding this matter. It appears that none of you have remembered that you were elected to represent the voters and taxpayers of Humble ISD, not the school district or your own political agendas. There is more important priorities that you should be addressing. There is an election in May, and elections have consequences. I'm ashamed of y'all. And
Thank
so are
you.
the rest of the voters.
April Henshaw. Okay, I'm going to circle back. Julie Ludwig. Megan Fast.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Megan Fast, and I'm back again to speak about the pornography in the schools. That's clearly violating the law. Texas Penal Code has its own law that says it is illegal to distribute harmful material or pornography to minors. Harmful taken as a whole, can be appeals to the prudent interest of a minor in sex, nudity, or excretion, is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole with respect to what is suitable for minors, and is utterly without redeeming social value for minors. And knowing the person is a minor, he sells, distributes, exhibits, or possesses for sale is or exhibition to a minor harmful material. The Supreme Court has ruled that transmitting obscenity and child pornography, whether via the internet or other means, is illegal under federal law for both adults and juveniles. Obscenity is not protected under the First American
Thank you.
rights to freedom of speech. All 40 titles in the Kingland High School Library
Thank
meet
you.
the three-prong Miller test. How many minutes do you guys have to speak? One?
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll be back. I'm not going away.
Thank you. Okay, as we move on to our action items, first, I would like to ask that the board tonight, if we have any discussion, to wait to be recognized to speak. And if not, I will ask Rusty to cut all of our mics until we're recognized to speak. Moving to item 4, our action agenda for tonight. Our first item is item 4A, waiver of board operating procedures and policies for 2022-2023 board officer selection. Do I have a motion?
No motion put in.
Okay.
Madam President, tonight there is no recommended motion from the administration, but any board member may make a motion if they so choose.
Thank you. Do I have a motion? Okay, well, we'll move on, or,
I guess the question I have is, by waiving the policy, we are really, we'd basically be saying that we did something wrong when we're going to show on video that we didn't.
okay, well, we can move on. There was no motion, and there is no second. The next item is item 4B, board officer for selection for 2022-2023.
Madam President, a point of order.
I did not
you're-
recognize you. Please let me recognize you, okay? And I'm in the middle of reading a motion. So do I have a motion? Okay,
Well, in order to discuss, we would have to make a motion of some sort
That
on
is
one of
correct.
these. Is that correct?
Mr. Sitton,
Okay.
I need to recognize you first.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So, one
my
second.
bad.
Yes,
That is correct. As a matter of parliamentary procedure, there should be a motion before proceeding to discuss the topic.
okay, thank you. So do I have a motion for item 4B? Mr. Sitton,
Madam President, I move that the board maintain the officer selection that was done in June, at the June board meeting.
do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Scarfo?
Yeah, the discussion is the same. So you're going to keep what we did in June. You didn't even do the waiver, which I think was a mistake anyway, because of what the precedent that would set. Because any parent, so if they don't like something in here, as a for instance, can a parent come and say, hey, that doesn't work for my child? Or a staff member comes and says, hey, that particular policy doesn't work for me. I want you to waive it. Because that's what we're telling them. That's the box you're opening by doing that. So I don't understand how we can move to this, to vote on something that if the same selection is kept in place, unless it's going to be changed. And that's what I don't understand. So I don't see the officers in they're not listed in terms of who are the officers being voted on.
Okay.
So do we have that information?
What do you mean by not knowing who the officers are that we are selecting?
So
I think he
you're-
said to keep the
you wanna
current
keep
officers that
what-
we
okay,
have.
you want to keep what you had in June. So again, how does that change the violation of the policy? I don't get that. I
Okay.
really don't. It's a simple matter. And even last week, when I brought it up, contrary to opinion, it didn't require the board to do anything. So it didn't need to be an agenda item. The individual, in this case, it was you, and this isn't a personal thing. It's just can't stand. And if you step down, the policy takes care of itself. And that was what I really was having a trouble understanding why that was not an easy matter to follow. And as I said, where does this end if we don't follow our own policies? And to be said, and for it to be said that, well, a local policy or even a legal policy, well, they don't have a standing as law. Well, I disagree wholeheartedly with that. That's what the education statutes allow a school district to do. They approve policies and procedures. That's how the entity is governed. And people look to us, and I think some of the speakers really, said it way better than I can, that
Pardon me, we are not
Please,
supposed to
yeah,
have speakers from the audience. So, Mr. Scarfo, I think the first thing that we probably should do, because I will give everybody a chance to speak as often as they like on the dais, but I would like to ask our outside counsel, Mr. Jonathan Brush, if you could come to the podium to explain the law to us and the statute.
Good evening. The Texas Education Code, Section 11.151, grants authority in a local school district to take all steps necessary to govern the school district unless a power has been reserved to the Commissioner of Education or the state. Courts that have interpreted that provision have held that a school district has the right to set its own policies, interpret its own policies, and take variances from its own policies. So when a school district passes a policy and then varies from the policy, the school district is not violating law. At most, the school district is implicitly waiving or suspending the policy when it takes action. It's a matter of governance, not a matter of a violation of state law or a violation of law. It's simply a question of the board interpreting its own policies and choosing to act in a manner that is contrary to a policy, which constitutes an implicit suspension.
Okay. And just wanted to clarify a couple of other things. Is it true that we are not allowed to deliberate any item that is not on the agenda?
That is correct. The Texas Open Meetings Act requires that no deliberation on a matter occur unless it has been publicly posted consistent with the terms of the act. Under normal circumstances, that requires an agenda item that is posted in accordance with the act at least 72 hours before the meeting. A deliberation occurs when there is an exchange between board members in the presence of a quorum of the board. The act provides that if a matter is raised that is not posted, it can only be responded to with specific factual information or a request that it be placed on a future agenda for deliberation.
And just to clarify, school boards can go into executive session at any time to get advice on personnel issues, and the board is covered under personnel issues. Is that correct?
Provided that the personnel exception has been posted as an exception to the open meeting on the agenda, that is correct. The personnel exception to the Open Meetings Act covers the appointment, selection, or review of a public officer. Trustees are public officers, and so the appointment evaluation may be deliberated in closed session under an exception to the act.
And last that I have right now is, based on your expertise, has this been addressed in any other court or anything like that regarding school boards, essentially waiving their policy by moving to do something differently?
So what I have found is case law where the Texas Supreme Court has held that as a school board is entitled to interpret and make its policies, that departures from the policy do not constitute a violation of law. They're simply a matter of governance, unless there is some other law that requires a different step, that requires a specific outcome. In a situation where there is no positive state law that requires an outcome or requires taking an action, that is correct.
Thank you very much. I may need you to come back, but for now, I think we're good. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and reach out to each board member to give them an opportunity to speak, and then we can circle back, kind of like when we have board comment. So I'll start with Mr. Sitton.
Thank you, Madam President. I do have prepared remarks tonight. Just to deviate from my remarks, I just want to make sure everyone understands it was talked about in the May board meeting that the first time that I know of since I've been on the board that this policy tried to be changed, Mr. Scarfo tried to change that in the 2011-2012 school year prior to Bonnie Longian taking over as president. So that was the first time that this has happened. I want to thank everybody tonight for being here. I want to apologize to Dr. Fagan and her entire cabinet for having to come for another night. I will say one of the speakers did make a point. Why are we here? I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous why we're here. The sheer chaos, disrespect, divisiveness that Dr. Fagan and the cabinet have had to endure is unacceptable and inexcusable. Now, I want to address some of the comments that have been made and questions that have come up since the June or at the June and August board meetings. In the August meeting, Mr. Scarfo said we were not being legal. When I objected to the idea we were breaking the law, he denied saying that. I went back and reviewed the video, and in fact, he did. He claimed that no discussion with legal had occurred or wanted to know when and how these discussions took place. Rusty, would you turn on the video from the June board meeting, please?
Yes.
Which received, I'm sorry, a second from Ms. Morrison. So the motion on the table is an amended motion to have Ms. Dixon serve as president. That's been motioned and seconded. The board would have to vote to accept the amendment and then would have to vote to accept Ms. Dixon as president for a second term if that's what the board chose to do.
And Madam President, also the next action item is the amendment of board operating procedures. And correct me if I'm wrong, board operating procedures are a self-governance position, correct?
They are procedures, not policies. That's correct.
So those procedures don't have to be changed prior to making this action.
They do not.
Thank you, Rusty.
Okay, so first
So, number one, before we took a vote, we asked legal counsel if we could take the vote prior to changing the board policy. There was an item right after that to discuss changing the board policy. Hindsight would have been cleaner doing them just the opposite, probably. But at the end of the day, we even sought an alternative opinion that reaffirmed what we just heard twice now. And when we took that vote, we followed it up with a discussion about board policy, and we voted to move that to committee for wording to bring back to the board at a future board meeting to officially change that policy. So there was no, yeah, we're just going to kick it down the road. Well, we're just not going to pay attention. We purposely, in that meeting, had both items to elect officers and to change the policy, and it was voted to move it to committee for proper wording to come back and vet, which is what most boards do. They bring policies to the board to vet wording, wordsmith it a little bit, and then come back with a final. So that's what's been happening. There are specific protocols to follow. If a board member believes policy or behavior issues have surfaced, Mr. Scarfo chose not to follow those protocols, but instead waited 2 months on the first day of school to create a situation we tried to avoid. If you watch that June board meeting, you will also notice that once the motion for officers was made, no one seconded the motion. Everybody just kind of, it was really awkward. Everybody just kind of looked at each other like, and so finally, Mr. Scarfo seconded the motion. Seeing the awkwardness, Ms. Dixon adjourned to closed session prior to the vote. This was done out of respect for Mr. Scarfo, so I'm glad she did that. We were able to discuss our own personal feelings about the reasons we did not second the vote. I will not divulge specific conversations for executive session. That would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. It is also good to point out adjourning into closed session for specific reasons during the open board meeting does not violate the Open Meetings Act either, as been ascertained. I think it is also important to notice how awkward the next portion of the meeting went, which clearly showed that this was not a group premeditated movement that's also been accused. Ms. Dixon was shocked when I asked her to remain as president for a second term. Again, there were no other motions on the table, so the original motion was amended, changing only the office of president. As Mr. Scarfo continued to push for action, that alone did not necessarily violate the Open Meetings Act. However, if the board had acted on that, it would have been a violation of the Open Meetings Act. We did seek outside counsel. We did seek outside legal opinion, and that was confirmed. As this situation relates to legal counsel, again, general counsel is to provide legal advice to the board. That's what our in-house attorney is there for, give us legal advice. He or she does not govern the board. The board governs itself. Board policy BDAA local is a locally developed policy of the board and by the board. It is not a legal statute or regulation at either the state or federal level. Policies are updated, removed, changed, etc. periodically. As a matter of fact, Mr. Scarfo, back in 2019, without going through the board president, got copies of our board operating procedure, made handwritten notes on changes he wanted to make to these very board operating procedures. So, how did we get to this point? Why did I feel making this change in officers was in the best interest of the entire Humble ISD community? We as board members abide by a creed, a code of ethics, a standard of behavior. We also abide by many specific protocols like Robert's Rules of Order and board meeting protocols. If a board member cannot or will not adhere to these items, it is the responsibility of the remaining board members through the board president to self-police or self-govern. Allow me to read a few excerpts from each. In the creed, it says, "I do not need to know all the facts of the educational process or of general school administration. I am not expected to do this work, but I am responsible to see this work is being done. My work as a board member, as a member of the Board of Education, consists of assisting in choosing a competent superintendent to guide the district. Deciding within the provisions of the applicable laws is done, setting educational priorities and appraising the work to see that it is done competently and economically. The administration of the education program and the conduct of school business shall be left to the superintendent and he or her staff. I deal directly with the superintendent or through the board president and do not attempt to handle school business matters with other district employees." These are all very important with some other comments I'm going to make. Code of ethics, I will accord others the respect I wish for myself. I will tell the truth. I will share my views while working for consensus. I will respect the majority decision as the decision of the board. I will avoid personal involvement in activities the board has delegated to the superintendent. Standard of behavior, board members should maintain the confidentiality of documents and discussions from closed session. Board members are responsible for policing each other. When a board member fails to adhere to the standards of behavior or the board operating procedures, the board president should address the concern. Repeated failure to adhere to the standards of behavior or board operating procedures will result in the board president meeting with the board member to address those concerns. When appropriate, the board may also issue a private warning to the offending board member, and in the case of repeated violation or violations of a sufficiently egregious nature, public reprimand or censure the board member by formal action of the board. Board meeting protocol. Board members will follow the board-approved code of ethics in and out of board meetings. Board members will maintain professional and courteous behavior throughout the meeting, even during emotionally charged discussions over complex issues. Board members will only speak after acknowledgement from the board president. Board members will refrain from condescending or critical comments to members of the staff, public, or board. There are also assumptions listed in the board operations. As example, the board functions as a corporate body. Decisions are made by the whole, and once a decision is made, all the board members will support that decision. Board members will act professionals, as professionals. They will conduct themselves in a manner that respects others and supports the decisions of the board. So beginning back in May of 2019, upon his election, Mr. Scarfo has failed repeatedly to adhere to these very things he has sworn to uphold. He has met or tried to meet privately with cabinet members without Dr. Fagan's initial knowledge. He has met or tried to meet privately with building principals and staff without Dr. Fagan or board president's knowledge. He has met privately with parent groups or community groups without Dr. Fagan or board president prior knowledge. He questioned Dr. Fagan's hiring after board meeting approval by requesting copies of respective resumes of two individuals we had already approved. Spoke directly to at least two campus administrations recommending a friend of his for an assistant principal position. Sent emails asking 27 specific questions regarding student code of conduct requiring multiple staff members to leave their current duties to answer. Sent email to legal asking for copies of board operating procedures and recommending potential changes, including ideas from neighboring district, without discussing with board president. Reached out directly to member of cabinet requesting information regarding why they needed so many new positions, what their focus would be, what is the expected student outcomes. All legitimate questions for the superintendent, but not for a cabinet member. Sent an email asking 12 specific questions regarding student handbook, mainly wording changes requiring multiple staff members to spend time away from their normal duties to answer. He broke protocol by bypassing the normal swearing-in process of the June 2019 board meeting to be sworn in early privately. All newly elected board members are required to go through new board member orientation. His response to that invitation was, "No thanks." A lot of this was addressed by Dr. Fagan in June of 2019, but to no avail. In September of 2019, our current trustee at the time requested some modifications to the board operating procedures concerning trustee requests, limiting staff time to 30 minutes or less, and also adding censor language. He did this through proper protocol by working with the board president, vice president, and superintendent. The board operating procedures were amended on September 10th, 2019. In light of the operating procedures being modified and why, I chose to look at communication between Mr. Scarfo and Dr. Fagan from May 2019 through September 2019, just to get a quick snapshot. That is all of the email correspondence in a 4-month period, not including the rest of the board, not including anyone else, but just between Mr. Scarfo and our superintendent. She manages an organization, the largest employer in this community, manages a budget over $500 million. And one board member sent that many emails in a 4-month period. Now, that board member's been on the board for 39 months now. I have no idea how many more are out there. I just chose a small snapshot, mainly because board operating procedures were amended in September of 2019 because of that. There's over 150 pages of emails in that 4-month span. So surely this behavior would have stopped, right? Wrong. Dr. Fagan sent the board an email on February 9th of 2022 stating that a few staff were being reached out to directly on various topics with a reminder that we only have one employee and she is willing to work with each and every one of us to answer our questions and resolve any issues. She also sent a similar email back in June of 2019. So everyone on this dais knew what was expected of us, what the behavior was expected, and one board member chose to disregard that. So, this prompted me to look at more communication. Mr. Scarfo chairs our finance committee. So I wanted to look back and see, based on the time drain that he put in with our superintendent, was there a time drain with our CFO? And for the last year, there's over 150 emails to and from our CFO. Some of those are legit. Some of those, we have monthly committee meetings. Some of those are requesting documents ahead of time to be prepared, which makes sense. But that's more work that the CFO has to do. Then they have their meeting. And then after the meeting, there's more follow-up emails questioning things that happened in the meeting. Well, why did we get the stuff ahead of time to be prepared if we still have to ask questions afterwards? Just curious on that one. The curious thing is he requests documents before several meetings so he could be more prepared. I just talked about that. Our CFO, as well as all staff, is very gracious and accommodating, but does he really have the time to deal with questions that should have been answered in committee, especially if he had to prepare pre-work for Mr. Scarfo? Moving on, the board unanimously approved moving the 2022 bond referendum forward to voters in the spring of this year. During discussion, Mr. Scarfo expressed his thoughts, but in the end, he voted to approve. It later came to my attention that although he voted yes in the boardroom, he was actively campaigning against it in certain community circles. He has denied this accusation. I respect that. Next, he sent an email to our CFO prior to approving the 4% raise for teachers. The wording he used gave the appearance he was questioning or accusing the CFO from withholding information from his finance committee. This was in response to a detailed message sent from Dr. Fagan to the entire board recommending a 4% raise versus a 3% raise, why they were doing this, and how they were going to pay for it. It was already there. Well, that was the last straw for me, and I told him that. Then the events that occurred at the June board meeting regarding board officers. He could have asked to revisit under future board business, but he didn't. At the July board meeting, he could have asked to revisit under future board business, but he didn't. So he waits until the first day of school to address during school board member comment. He knew we could not take action nor discuss, but did it anyway. When the item for future board business came up, once again, he remained silent. After the board meeting, he sent an email to community members trying to garner support. He asked all to share on their social media platforms as well. Is he really trying to do what's best for Humble ISD, or is this just another selfish way to make it about him? Again, I want to stress, out of respect for Mr. Scarfo, we tried addressing this discreetly and directly with him, but to no avail.
Thank you. Mrs. Parker?
Okay. So, I believe this is a manufactured crisis. I want to start by saying that I do support the rotation. I would have had no problem, as I sat in my seat on June 21st, supporting any one of the 7 of us up here, and I made the motion for Mr. Scarfo, Ms. Morrison as vice president, myself as secretary, and Mr. Kirschhofer as parliamentarian. With that said, it wasn't to be. It wasn't to be. The motion barely got a second. It was very awkward, and we went into closed. We came out of closed, and it just wasn't going to happen. So I then made a motion to withdraw my motion. That didn't get a second. And you saw the video from today. Mr. Sitton made a motion for Ms. Lamont Dixon to be president of the board. That did pass. Eventually, I made the motion for Ms. Lamont Dixon for president, Ms. Morrison vice president, myself secretary, Mr. Kirschhofer parliamentarian. That passed. It's done. I mean, it's done. Nobody, if Mr. Scarfo at the time would have thought we were trying to commit malfeasance, he would have said something at the time. He waited 2 months. And I love Mr. Scarfo. I mean, we have known each other. We've been colleagues for over a decade. I hate to use the word friends, but I mean, we're good friends. And anyway, historically, this board has worked well as a team. This kind of stuff does not happen. I'm so deeply saddened about the events that occurred on August 9th. And I want to discuss the email that Mr. Scarfo sent to 1,500 of his supporters. Was it 1,500? Okay. So however many. But I want to also bring up the fact, what about every time one of the 7 didn't have things work out how we wanted, if we send an email out?
Do you want me to answer it now?
Not yet.
Just wait. So, no, I'm not just not you, I mean, everybody. If we all send an email out every time we didn't like the way stuff happened, I mean, it would be really bad. It would be really bad for the district. So the email that you sent out says, part of it says, hello, everyone. Please take a few minutes to review this clip from the most recent board meeting. I raised the issue of the board being in violation of its policy, but it remains unresolved. The policies I referenced are attached. Contrary to what I was told in response, correcting the violation did not require an agenda item or board action. I want you to answer this. Did you receive this email from our council?
Mr. Scarfo?
Yesterday I did.
Thank you.
So in the email from our council, it says, our review of the recording of August 9th board meeting confirms that the board's selection of its board officers occurred on June 21st, 2020 meeting, was discussed, i.e. deliberated in the meeting in the presence of a quorum of the board. Consequently, the matter should have been publicly posted as a topic for discussion and possible action. So our advice from our council says it should have been posted. Your email says it did not have to be posted, but our council said it did. So, sorry. Anyway, your point is that we violated a policy. Sending out this email violates many policies of this board. And I just want to be clear about that. But I agree with Mr. Lurie that spoke. Nothing that's being done tonight is putting kids first. Nothing being done tonight is improving student outcomes, student safety, helping teachers who are working their butts off in the classroom. Nothing that is being done tonight is improving the team of 8, the body corporate, and I love you, but I'm disappointed that this email was sent out. I'm sorry, but I am. Ms. Dixon?
Thank you. Mr. Holmes?
You know, I was thinking about the first time that I met Mr. Scarfo and reached out to him. Last year was October 6th, I believe, October 6th, 2021. And I had reached out to Mr. Scarfo asking, you know, I looked at that original text, asking for some wisdom and insight, wanted to run again. And I was told, you know, by a few community members, it was good, you know, to meet with Mr. Scarfo. And, you know, I was just looking back at the correspondence back and forth, and it was just very nice, very nice. You know, you connect that to back in middle of the spring, our family pet passed away due to cancer, and I remember Robert calling me personally and expressing his condolences, right? And then I remember in late spring when Robert Scarfo called me and asked what positions I would like to serve on the upcoming year in terms of committees. And my response to him was, I serve at the pleasure of the board. Wherever you see value, that's where I'll be. So I wanted to assure you that it's not a business. It's personal, right? Mr. Scarfo, personal, I can vouch for any day of the week. But in terms of him being the incoming president, I cannot. He has not risen to the level or the bar that this district upholds. We are one of the most respected districts in this state, I will say in this county, and I'm not going to stand on ceremony and act as if there have been certain things that Mr. Scarfo hasn't done that have been irreprehensible to me. What did it for me and was the straw that broke the camel's back is I don't want to say CFO. I want to say Billy Beatty. You know why? Because it's personal to me. When you accuse somebody the way Mr. Scarfo did, knowing that he's on the finance committee, and with us already being in the spotlight because we are a fast growth district, we've done some things when it came to the pandemic, so we're already in the spotlight. But I don't like you addressing that in email. I understand it, but you could have called Billy and asked for clarity. And then that was also the point of this 4% raise. And then you look at the way Mr. Scarfo, again, on ceremony during his comments, acts like he's been behind it and for it, when behind the scenes we know, and with certain detail, can prove that he was trying to undermine the process the whole time. So if you want me to understand, Mr. Scarfo, why Ms. Dixon, it was the only reason we, in my opinion, for me, I can only speak for me, I chose to vote for her to remain as president, was just for continuity of operations. That's all. If any of the board had brought up somebody else, the only reason is I did not want Robert Scarfo as the incoming president. He does not represent this board, in my opinion. If we look at board member standard of behavior, point number 5, it says board members are responsible for policing each other. That's what I believe we're doing. It says when a board member fails to adhere to the standards of behavior or the board operating procedures, the board president should address the concern. I believe Madam Dixon has done that. Madam President has done that. I'd like to have you. Yes, right? Okay.
Multiple times.
Multiple times. Board members' creed, 5th paragraph, 2nd clause. It also reads, I will deal directly with the superintendent or through the board president and do not attempt to handle school business matters with other district employees. That is because they're all considered resources. I think Mr. Sitton has shown the level of detail that shows that Mr. Scarfo is in direct violation of that policy. All right, if we look at point number 7 of the board member's creed, it says when appropriate, the board may also issue a private warning to the offending board member. We have done that, and probably on numerous occasions from what it sounds like. In the case of repeated violations or violations of a sufficiently egregious nature, public reprimand or censure the board member by formal action of the board. Now, again, this is what I'm asking. Is this considered the public reprimand? Do we need to look at a motion? And again, I'm just asking of whether he needs to be, Mr. Scarfo, that is, needs to be censured. I don't know, but I will tell you, if we're looking at this document, the board member's ethics, board member's creed, I believe, and again, with the data that Mr. Sitton has taken the time to cull through, at least Mr. Scarfo should not be made president. And I don't know, and I don't know if it's up for discussion. Would this be considered a public reprimand? And do we need to look at censuring, which would then enable a clause where for the next 2 years, Mr. Scarfo would not be able to serve? That's what I have to say.
President
you.
Dixon, a public reprimand or censure would require board action and would require motion and is not a topic that is posted on the agenda tonight, so it would not be appropriate to deliberate further or make a motion to censure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brush. Next, Mr. Kirchhoffer.
Here we are. Believe it or not, I was really excited when I ran for office and wanted to sit in this chair. And but here we are. Early in 2020, after running, winning, in my situation, physically going through, getting in this chair with the community support and the people that are here tonight and the people that are watching, we shouldn't be here tonight. We should not be here tonight. And but here we are. And I'm going to touch on a couple things. I don't believe in enough's been said, but for me personally, I want the public to hear it. I want the trustees to hear it, and I want Robert Scarfo to hear it from me publicly, which we tried to avoid. We tried to avoid all this. We tried. Dr. Fagan, the administration, the teachers, the staff, and how about the kids? We should not be here. I get why people are upset. I get it. I don't have my head in the sand. The optics, how things evolved back from June to now. But here we are. This could have been avoided. Anybody that knows me, I hate this microphone. It's been almost a year of this, and I can't get used to it. Anybody knows me, I love leaders. I love learning. I thought when I got on this board that there's 4 board members on here that have 10 years each. 10 or more years each. I mean, I'm new coming on the board, right? I love leaders. I want to learn from the people that have been on this board for 8, 10, 12 years. I want to lean on the senior trustees. I don't want to sit here and bash Mr. Scarfo. There's nothing to be gained for that. Robert and I actually have a good relationship. Okay? But here we are. In the summer and late fall of last year, I was told there was an individual breaking board policy, meeting with administrators, teachers without the superintendent or president's knowledge. I don't know who it is. I know they weren't talking about me. I know that. Not that I'm above reproach. If I make a mistake, I don't mind being called out about it. I love learning. I want to be a sponge. I want to, and I'm 53, I want to keep learning. I want to be the best trustee I can for this district. I've lived here since 1999. I'm threaded in the community. I want the best teachers, the best administrators, and I want the best board. We tried to handle this correctly. Robert, you even said it at least twice. If you don't want me to be president, I won't be president. You said it. Those are your words. We didn't want to be here, but here we are. Let's just go to the bond. We get the bond, it's contentious. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. We shouldn't all get along. That's what makes this country great. It's okay not to get along. We need to listen to each other's opinions. It's okay. The bond went through. I'm going to eat the microphone. But after the bond goes through, why is he bad-mouthing the bond? Why are you bad-mouthing the bond after it goes through? Fact. Divisiveness. That's a lack of respect for me and the rest of these trustees, let alone Dr. Fagan. We should work in concert together. We should not always agree. It makes no sense. I don't want to be on a board where we all agree. It makes zero sense. I also don't want to break policy procedures and do things wrong. That's why we have legal counsel. We should not be here. And this next one, I'll probably be done because people need to get to work tomorrow and we need to get through this. But we had an appointment last year. Mrs. Toomey left, went to Oklahoma, moved her family. We had an appointment last year. Mr. Scarfo, you agreed with who's sitting next to me. You agreed with him sitting next to me. You voted for him. We put him through. But how many times have you brought up, and you brought it up, it's on the video, you brought it up again, that you don't agree with the process? You know me well enough. You could have said to me at any time, you could, yes, there's plenty of video of it. You said over and over again that you disagree with how that happened, how the appointment happened. I'm just stating the facts. I'm not getting in the weeds. This is stuff that's public record, everything I'm saying. We must move on from this tonight. We must put our focus on the kids. We must, the speakers, I applaud. Again, we don't have to agree. We should not agree with everybody that comes and speaks. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But undermining the board, undermining the administration, undermining Dr. Fagan and the unity that is here and what we're building, all of us, everybody watching, those teachers, those kids, it is a destination district. The trustees should not be on display tonight. We should not be the focal point of this district. We shouldn't be. We should work in concert together. Agreed with Mrs. Parker. Agree, Mr. Holmes. Might have been fine with anybody but Robert or me. I want 3 more years. It's like drinking through a fire hose up here. It truly is, and I love it, though. I honestly do. I do not love tonight. I care deeply about everybody on this board, and Robert Scarfo, he's just, it's a hard no on him being president. That's it. You can have your opinions, and we should respect each other. And I truly hope and pray that we're stronger for it as we move forward. And we shouldn't be here, but we are. So thanks, Madam President.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison.
Everyone's right. We shouldn't be here. It's despicable. It's disgraceful. But the disrespect that has been done so far is also awful. Number one, I know it's very difficult, Mr. Scarfo, because I sit on this board and I ran against you. But I applauded you when you re-ran. I thought, wow, somebody's got the guts to go out there and do it. But then, all of a sudden in 2019, the work that you put on the staff out there and the superintendent's office is disgraceful. Going into buildings, having meetings with administrators without the superintendent's knowledge, that's unacceptable. And I used to be out there. And I know the hours they put in. And it's not needed. And it's unethical. The other side of the coin, you've heard all this. The numbers of hours that they had to put in. There's no respect there. The way you talked to legal counsel the other night, the way you treated Billy, that's unacceptable. And when I saw the email, that was totally unethical. And you did that to all of us. You did that to our board. There is no I in team. It's not about each one of us. This board is here for the kids and the staff in this district. And that was despicable. And I definitely do not feel that you have earned the right to be president. And I won't repeat all of this because it's all the same. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I wrote out my notes, and then I'll circle back to see if there are any other questions or discussion. It is interesting to me that we are here tonight, and I do agree we shouldn't be. We have worked as a harmonious board for years, even prior to my serving for the past 5 years. I am not suggesting we all agree, nor is that what any of us want. We do not always agree, but we do want a meeting of the minds to do what is best for Humble ISD. Once we make a tough decision, we should walk out of this boardroom as one. Sometimes we win our battles, and sometimes we lose them. But sometimes we even lose on issues that we are passionate about. But what is most important is we should not lose our focus. Our focus should be the students of Humble ISD. I, for one, find it shameful that on the first day of school, when we should be celebrating our students and our entire staff for all they have done to make the moment happen, instead we had a board colleague that made the day about himself. In 2018, we won an award for being the best school board in the state of Texas. Why? Because we have worked smart to focus on continuous improvement and innovation. We are never complacent about where we are. We always want to grow, and we want to be the leaders of this growth amongst our board colleagues throughout the state. Undermining one another is not what we should do. Dysfunction on a school board essentially leads to dysfunction in a district. As a taxpayer, a mom, a community leader, a board member, I do not want Humble ISD to be a dysfunctional district. All of us here have had extensive training about how to lead with excellent governance. Our training last year, the leader of that training even said, "You are a board that does it right, and honestly, you could lead the training for all of the other boards in the state." We have always been professional, mindful, and classy. We do not act out. It has been, and tonight, this has to be nipped in the bud immediately. But let's backtrack. In June, at the board meeting, when I realized the officer motion made by the parliamentarian received a delayed second by Mr. Scarfo, my first thought was, oh my goodness, this may not go well. So I'm going to move to closed session to discuss the details as a personnel matter. I did this specifically to prevent Mr. Scarfo from any potential public humiliation or embarrassment. My first thought was of him. Let's backtrack even more. In April, a board member came to me to discuss a concern that Mr. Scarfo did not represent us as a board. Again, I thought of Mr. Scarfo, and I talked that board member off the ledge. But in early June, after a few more occurrences, that same board member reached out to me again and said, "You know, I know you want me to let this go, but Mr. Scarfo does not represent me." At that point, I reached out to legal counsel to learn of my options based on various scenarios, because I wanted to be prepared for the June board meeting by confirming my understanding of the law, board policy and procedures, and what options I have during the meeting. I did this in an effort to remain compliant, which is actually something they can vouch for me. I say this all the time to our legal counsel, please keep me compliant. Then in July at the board meeting, crickets. So last week, at the August board meeting, I was shocked at the exchange and allegations, but honestly not surprised. Although I thought of Mr. Scarfo first in previous scenarios, he decided to make this public. Accusing someone of violating the law is defamation per se, especially when you know full well the circumstances leading to it. And you know we are in the process of updating our policies and procedures that govern the board. In my opinion, and in the way I lead, it is not okay for any board member, which includes you, Mr. Scarfo, to berate our CFO in an email suggesting he has withheld information or did anything nefarious regarding teacher raises. But then on the same night at the board meeting, you turn around and showboat about how you are so excited we made a decision in Finance Committee, which you currently chair, to increase teacher salaries. I do thank you, however, for apologizing to our CFO for your behavior. In my opinion, and in the way I lead, it is not okay for any board member, which also includes you, Mr. Scarfo, to speak to our in-house legal counsel in a manner suggesting she is incorrect about the law or policy and procedures. And my hope is that you will also reach out to her to apologize for your behavior. In my opinion, and in the way I lead, it is not okay for any board member, which also includes you, Mr. Scarfo, to share an email to community members from your Insperity work email saying your board colleagues are in violation of policy, and ask those same people to share it with their contacts on social media. Of course, I do not expect an apology from you to the rest of the board. These are just a few examples of what I deem as inappropriate behavior by any board member. However, we are all different in how we address situations, but it's just not really how I roll. My personal goal as a leader is to lead with integrity while maintaining my values and my character. My goal as a school board trustee is to uplift Humble ISD by always doing what is best for our students. We need to come together for the betterment of our community. We need to be unified in order to do what is best for our students. And I ask you all tonight, everyone that's here, everyone that is watching, everyone that rewinds this and watches it online later, take some time to reflect and remember your why. Because my why is the students of Humble ISD. I will continue to serve on the Humble ISD Board of Trustees in whatever capacity my board colleagues collectively choose. I want to apologize to the students, our entire faculty and staff for the attention being taken away from them. And I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Fagan, Stephanie, and Billy for all you do to make our district an exceptional place that we are all proud of. This should not be happening tonight, but it is. And I think we have all shared our perspectives. I don't know, Mr. Scarfo, if you have any additional comments, and I will give you a moment to speak, and then we will move on with the vote.
Wow, you'll give me a moment after all of you just lambasted me.
Yes, Mr. Scarfo, you can have as much time as you like.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, I'm not surprised by your comments. And you know, if we get agendas to look at, are we not supposed to have any questions about them? I don't know everything that goes on, and I'm not supposed to. So if I ask Dr. Fagan a question and she answers me, what's wrong with that? I thought that's what we're supposed to do. I can't send my questions to all board members. Only the president could do that. And sometimes she has shared my questions and answers, and that's fine. That seems like a good process. And you know, a lot's been made. Let me just read the email that I sent to Mr. Beatty, and this was after just like 3 or so days after we had our final budget committee meeting, and we're ready to present it to the board. And there were some, you know, major changes Dr. Fagan told us about on May 20th. And so I just asked, and I also asked her too, and there were some major changes from our Monday meeting last Friday when the information was shared. I'm having trouble understanding how the revenue info wasn't known on Monday, since these are all just estimates anyway. So I was surprised by that we were able to add $1.5 million to the budget, because while we were having that final Budget Finance Committee meeting, I was pushing to raise the rate for the special ed paras from $14 to $14.50. And there was a lot of pushback on that because, you know, if we did that, we'd bust the budget. And finally, we compromised on increasing to $14.25. So a couple days later, I was surprised, and that was what I sent. And the first I ever heard that Mr. Beatty and Dr. Fagan felt I was questioning their integrity was that night in June in that closed session when I, for lack of a better term, got ambushed. And there's somebody on this dais who can corroborate that as the only person who defended me. But so I sent an apology. And I said, I want you to both know that my questions in my 520 and 523 emails below were in no way a question about your integrity. I apologize for some of the wording that I used in those emails that caused you to feel that way. And I want to assure you that's not my intention. I believe that you know how much I greatly respect and appreciate your work. Over the last 3 years, I have stated that publicly countless times. I would not say it in public or privately if I didn't mean it or believe it. Again, I apologize for making you feel otherwise. And Dr. Fagan responded back, I guess for both of them, thank you for the note, I appreciate it. We'd never keep something from you. We made the adjustments as soon as we had the information, and it's important that you feel certain that, so thank you again. And so I went back and said, again, I'm sorry I gave that impression. It was not my intent. I know you're very forthcoming with information and answers to my questions. And, okay, so that's that matter. Now, let me also just talk for a moment about when they were saying how I undermined the superintendent. Okay, well, when COVID was in full bloom, there were some people who sent some rather mean emails to Dr. Fagan. And since they copied everybody on the board, and I believe individually, I responded to some of these folks. And one was to a gentleman, I won't say his name, but your comments too about Dr. Fagan are so off base that you aren't even in the stadium parking lot. If you want to be critical of specific actions she or the board has taken, that's fine. But I ask you to be civil in your tone and that discourse in which you engage is evidence-based. And there was another one like that too, some very nasty things this individual said. And I told this gentleman, if you choose to criticize the district, that's fine. The policy of the district, that's fine. But there's no place for such vile statements as you have made about Dr. Fagan, regardless of how angry or fearful you may be. And so that's the kind of stuff. And this whole thing about meeting with administrators. When I first got back on the board, I asked Mr. Correa if he could meet with me and Ms. Toomey to kind of give us an update on what was going on from a facility standpoint, looking at maps. And I didn't say to Dr. Fagan, is that okay? And that's true. But Mr. Correa told her, and she said, oh, that's fine, but as long as all the board members, any board member wants to come, comes. And I think actually Ms. Lamont Dixon came to that meeting. I had no problem with that. And so I got to understand, her protocol in visiting campuses and whatnot, because it actually says on page 17 of we have it on our board operating procedures about visiting schools and other districts and other district facilities. And it says nothing here about getting approval. But it asks to do certain things and follow certain protocols when you're there. But I would never, and it says don't just show up someplace. I mean, that would be ludicrous to do. And so in the comments about the 4% versus 3% raise, again, I mean, makes no sense to me. I was surprised. I asked the questions. I got response. So, of course, I'd want to give them a 10% raise if we could afford that. That wasn't the question or the issue. So it wasn't like, oh, here I'm in behind closed doors, I'm trashing it, but now out in public, I'm going to say, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, I'm sorry. Some of the stuff you guys are spewing, I just going to make my head blow up. And that night, when you did what you did, I mean, you talk about the code of ethics. I never once, and you'd have to show me where someone or the board president contacted me and sat down about a certain specific matter. And if it wasn't corrected, had another meeting and said, hey, this has to be taken care of. I wasn't accorded that. And, you talk about these individuals and organizations I was telling not to support, that I didn't support the bond. I publicly stated how I felt in terms of the size of it, but once we voted, we voted. And I know there was one elected official who was out there saying that, oh, your whole board doesn't support this, telling Dr. Fagan, because Ms. Parker and I had talked about it not being the size it needed to be, but we, in the end, voted. And I was accused about talking to the Tea Party. I don't know who in the Tea Party, but I asked the two founders if I said that to them, and they said no, and a couple other individuals. And I recall another elected official who got on me about voting for the bond because he thought it was way too big. And I said, hey, and Miss Dixon Lamont Dixon was standing right next to me in his house. And I said, hey, I spoke my piece. I didn't change any minds. I still wanted to go forward with the bond. So if you want to criticize me for that, and a lot of people did, and that's okay. But I supported it. So I was not out there, and you know, the hearsay innuendo that you want to bring forward, that has no place. And the way you're treating me about that. So I would like to be able to confront those individuals who you say, and you say, and you say that I told them I didn't support the bond, because that's just not true. So that's what I'll say about that. And like I already talked about, you know, the arranging meetings, and I have emails going back to 2019 where I wanted to visit a campus, I asked the principal, or I was invited somewhere, and Dr. Fagan knew about it. There was one, just wanted to let you know I was invited to speak at Mr. Conley's Teenage Republicans Club at noon. This is back in 2019. Okay, thanks. And so emails like that. And, you know, you can stack up whatever you like, but I think I have not gone to where, in my opinion, I have caused work. And of course, working on the Finance Committee these last 2 years, I do have conversations with Mr. Beatty. And he's never, and I've said to him, hey, I don't want to take your time. And he's never made me feel like he was just, you know, rolling his eyes on the other side of the phone, talking to me about something, or we're talking about how something worked. And, you know, sending emails with questions, if anyone felt on the administrative side, and Dr. Fagan, and Mr. Beatty, then I would have, you know, appreciated you telling me, hey, you know, like, what do you need, and stop. But I don't think I was just, the questions I asked is because I didn't know the answer. And my feeling is, if I raise my hand to vote on something, I want to feel comfortable explaining to a constituent, whether they agree with me or not, why I voted the way I did. And you can't do that without information. And we're not expected to know everything about the district. And I've never made an attempt to be acting superintendent. And I don't ever plan to do that. And you want to go a little farther on this whole deal back in June. Since you knew what you were going to do, you didn't accord me, you know, my right to know that you were going to discuss me. And I had the right to have that initial discussion in public if I so chose. But you didn't do that. And I can surmise a lot of reasons why you didn't. And Ms. Mayor, I have a question for you. Just saying, the last 6 months, have any districts reached out about our board operating procedures, and one particularly about rotation?
In terms of other districts asking for our board operating procedures?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, about how many?
3.
3? Okay. And let me ask you this. Prior to the meeting we had in June, did any board members contact you about how to go about deviating from our current board operating procedures without them being changed?
Mr. Scarfo, I can't really go into attorney-client privilege conversations as that would waive it for the full board, and I do not believe an individual member can waive it on behalf of the whole.
Okay, well then let me ask it another way. If that was the case, wouldn't you have to, or wouldn't you want to, or I think you'd have to share that kind of information with all board members of what's going on, because you don't represent just one person. You've told me that in the past, and I get that. It's, you represent the board, but you're not our individual, as individuals, you're not our attorney. I get it. But if those kind of questions were being asked by board members, don't the rest of the board have a right to understand what's going on and what's being discussed? I mean, I don't get the privilege on that. I'm asking. I'm not.
Mr. Scarfo, again, I represent the board as a body corporate. I've had individual conversations with all board members on this board as well as past boards on a variety of topics, which I then communicate and share with the superintendent in her role as the primary contact for the board.
Okay. I just want to understand, that. Look, and you, Mrs. Parker, questioning my sending out information, I'm entitled to do that. And I didn't send anything out to 1,500 people, by the way. I sent it out to some folks that I know, and now if people, shared it, that's their prerogative. But I don't think I should be criticized for doing that. And I'm not, because that's not an attempt to undermine, that's an attempt to get information out there. Because let's face it, not everybody in this district shows up at our board meetings or even watches them on live or after the fact. I thought it was important. And you've wanted to make this about me, and it's not about me. And you can sit here all night long. You all have made up your minds a long time ago of how you feel about me, and that's okay. You don't have to be my friends. You don't have to invite me to your house. You don't have to invite me to dinner. But I've treated all of you respectfully at this board table and away from this board table, and I just expect to be treated the same way. And if you don't want to, that's fine. You know what? It's not going to kill me. I got to tell you. I've had, worse things happen, and there are a lot worse things out there. And I agree that this is a monumental waste of time to be having these discussions because to me it was a simple thing to fix, but you chose to do it a different way. And Mr. Sitton, you're right. And this would have been a simple matter back in June if you would have just put the board operating procedures as an item for action. And people could have discussed changes and could have voted on changes and could have got rid of rotation. That's fine. I'd like to see the minutes. I'd have to go back and look at those minutes you were talking about where I wanted to do this back in 2011. I know you wanted to do it back in 2014-15 when I was rotating to be president, but at that point there were 4 votes to keep rotation in place, so it stayed. And that's fine. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. I think what we should focus on is what our mission is, and that's student advancement and supporting our teachers. And I'm, like I said, you can each say and feel however you want about me, that's fine. When I did learn about that one item, I'd apologize to Dr. Fagan and I apologize to Mr. Beatty. And it's my bad for making I was the one who wrote those emails. So I'm the only one to blame for how it came across, and that's the problem when you're writing and not talking. So I did that, and I apologize. But I'm not going to let people sit here and accuse me of things with hearsay and innuendo and just saying stuff. Do what you like as far as that goes, but I'm not going to stand for it. And I'm sorry, but I think you need to get on with it. Thank you.
I'll address just a few of the items that you mentioned. One was you were talking about a one-on-one meeting. I think the board essentially knows that I spoke to the board on many occasions. I did not single anyone out. I just shared about particular instances and said this needs to stop, this needs to stop, this needs to stop. I did not single anyone out. I was trying to be respectful. Outside of that, one comment that you made is that we knew what we were going to do. I would say that is absolutely not true, because if I knew that any of those things were going to happen at the board meeting in June, then board operating procedures would have absolutely have been on the agenda. But the point is we did not know. The only thing that I had really was a single board member that felt that you did not represent us. So I went and spoke to legal counsel to understand all scenarios. Like, well, we rotate, typically we vote on that, and it just moves forward. What happens if that doesn't happen? And trying to understand every scenario. What can I do? Do we move to closed session? So yes, I absolutely met with legal counsel so that I would be prepared for that meeting. And as far as having your opportunity to share in public, I think you definitely had that opportunity last week and again tonight, and now we have as well. And so I hope that addresses some of the things that you brought up. Do you have any other comments?
I'll repeat again. You didn't accord me my rights back in June under the Open Meetings Act, as I stated. And you can't change that. And you can't change that we violate our own policy. And that's fine, but we're past that now. And I told you that night in June that, hey, you didn't want me to be president? That's fine. But what I brought up, and to say, oh, why'd you wait 2 months? Well, I waited in July, and nobody acted. I didn't see anybody doing anything. Nothing was put on the agenda. So the following month, I brought it up in comments. And if that was uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. And like I said, do we tell staff, do we tell parents, like, hey, if you don't like a policy, it doesn't work for you that day, that week, well, we'll waive it for you. I don't think we want to do that. So anyway, and for you to just say things in generalities, that's not following what the Code of Ethics says to do. If you had a problem with me because a board member came to you about something I did or the superintendent did, then you should have followed what we did. You weren't sparing my feelings by not. I wouldn't take it personally. I don't think you'd approach me that way. So, yeah, that you should have done that.
So
and
you
not
did not
just
know
talk
it was
in
you
generalities.
when I said
No, because-
specifically not to do this? You did not realize it was you
No, I absolutely did
doing
not.
it when you were doing it, and he has a stack of papers showing you were doing it?
What, asking questions on agenda items, asking questions about finance, about the finance committee stuff? No, I'm sorry, but that's what people elected me to do, is to ask questions. Well, anyway.
Okay.
It's just, that's where I stand. So, you know what? And if I insulted or made any of you on this board feel badly, I apologize for that. Okay, to each person. And I think you owe me one as well. Thank you.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes 6-1. Next is our information item, item 5A, review of board operating procedures. Any questions or discussion from the board regarding this item? Mr. Sitton.
Yes, Madam President. So we have met multiple times, and we've asked for some wording from legal, because that's what we do. So this item was posted as information, and as chair of our committee, would you like to kind of talk about some of the ideas that we've kicked around and to come to a compromise, and we've listened to multiple folks, looked at our policy, other policies, and so forth. So can you kind of give the broad strokes here? Because I agree with Mr. Scarfo. We need to finalize this and be done with it.
And I agree, and we do have a meeting coming up next week, and I think at that point we will finalize it. I did ask for it to be an information item for tonight to kind of get some feedback from the board as we make those final decisions. I also reached out to legal counsel to essentially give us different options, like here's an option, you can do it this way or you can do it that way, just so that we could kind of look at all of those things. Generally speaking, what we are looking at is something where it says to, number one, be board president, you would have had to have served 4 years on the board. We're looking at that as an option to add that language. We're also looking to include that the board president role is elected, but that person could not serve longer than 2 years. We also looked at, since you actually have to have a board president and a secretary, as another option, as having those two elected in same similarities where it's a 2-year term and those are elected and the rest are rotating, or just the president is elected and everybody else rotates, which gives everybody an opportunity to be in an officer role. So just essentially kind of looking at it from that perspective to see going forward if the board has a situation where they believe a particular trustee is not the person that they want to lead in that effort, to essentially give the board an opportunity to make another decision without feeling bound by anything. And I know we can change that, obviously, based on our procedures, but looking at how all of that kind of pans out. And so I just wanted to get some feedback, if any of you have feedback, as we take this back to committee on the 25th, in hopes for us to bring it to the board meeting in September.
Yeah, let me just say this real quick.
Yes.
So, per the law, the board has to have a election of officers after a public election.
Correct.
So we only have an election every 2 years. So that's kind of where this 2-year came in. So the only 2 officer positions that have to be elected, that we have to have, we can have as many as we want, but the only 2 that we have to have is president and secretary. So that's kind of where that option came in. So.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, just to clarify, Mr. Sitton, Mrs. Morrison, and myself are on the board and superintendent evaluation committee. Yes.
And one of the things we talked about in committee was that because we have elections every 2 years, and to say the least, it takes you a year to learn the position. And so, no, by no means do we want a person to serve any more than 2 years, but at least once you get it under your belt, then you've got another year because we have an election coming up, and that makes a nice transition into that next session. And it's the same way with secretary now, and parliamentarian. About the time I got it down, I was really getting with it. I mean, it's like you need that year, to get under your belt and then actually understand what's going on, so you can actually help your other board members.
And
Yes.
just one more matter of clarity. In that June board meeting, modifying our board operating procedures was an agenda item.
Yes, we discussed it
But,
and we decided
yeah,
to take it to committee.
That's
There was a
correct.
vote.
So
Yes.
it was an agenda item, and originally it was to add the parliamentarian as part of the permanent rotation, because it never really made sense that was an appointed position, because we moved them into the rotation anyway.
Right,
So-
and I had asked Stephanie to make that language broad so that we could figure out, like, just in case, or this or that, and we did need to add the parliamentarian into the rotation, but then when the vote decided for it to move to committee, then I feel like we're going to work on it anyway. We'll just handle it in committee and then bring it to the full
I
board.
just wanted to make sure people knew it was on the agenda. It wasn't
Yes,
that
but it
it
was-
wasn't there, but it was broad, and the intention was one, and then as it moved, that's when the board voted to move it to committee.
Okay, Mrs. Parker?
I do want the committee to know that I support the rotation. I believe that it, works well, and that way you term limit your folks, and you don't have one president residing for a long period of time. The 4 years, you may run into trouble because, like, we're a young board, because Ken and I are 1 year, Marcus is how many months? 8 months, and so we're having an election in May, so I'm not sure about that language, in my opinion.
No, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
That does. So I made note of that. And maybe even in that, if we bring that to the full board for discussion, maybe we can have like a secondary option that says, in the event there aren't, and I'm okay, right? legal, okay. In the event there's no one who has 4 years of experience, then this is the Plan B, so to speak. But thank you for that. Okay. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. Thank you. Moving to our closing items, are there any topics for future board business? I have one. And I'm going to poll the board. I would like to add an agenda item to the next board meeting, requesting to remove Mr. Scarfo from all board committees. I'll just start on this end, Mr. Kirchhoffer. I don't need a second, I just need a poll. Like, are you okay with me adding that to the agenda? This is my
Yes.
typical way of handling this. Yes?
Yep.
Mr. Holmes?
Concur.
Mr. Sitton?
Yes.
Mr. Scarfo? No. Mrs. Parker? Mrs. Morrison? Okay, thank you. We will add that to the agenda for September. The time is now 7:10 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned.